Hey everybody, it's Connor from the Steel Lodge, and today we're checking out 5 Souls-like games on the Steam Deck. Now obviously Elden Ring came out this year, and that's a legendary game, but I want to check out games that aren't necessarily made by Fromsoft. A lot of indie developers have been picking up on the Souls-like genre. It's a very influential game genre, and you see it just everywhere now, honestly. 2022 also has a lot of games coming later in the year, with games like Lies of P, Steelrising, and Soulstice. Some of those might land in 2023, but some of them are landing in this year. And actually Thymesia just dropped, which is a shorter game, but it's really fun and more inspired by Bloodborne. Let's jump into the games list here now, and we'll start with Mortal Shell. Now we're checking out Mortal Shell. Mortal Shell is made with Unreal Engine 4, and it actually came out exclusively to the Epic Store quite a while ago, and I actually beat it when it originally launched. I was pretty excited for the game, and I enjoyed it. It took me around 15 hours. Now in my first playthrough of the game, I found the beginning of the game to be extremely difficult. I had a really tough time with it. But once I figured out the mechanics and what I should be doing and where things were around the map, I dominated the game. I figured out what shell I like using and what weapons I like using, upgraded them, and I basically never died after that point. I think part of the reason it was really hard for me at first when playing this game was there's definitely some different mechanics here, such as the ability to harden your character. At any point, if you press and hold down on the left trigger, your character will harden, and this allows you to take blows, and you can even harden mid-swing when you're attacking. This was really hard for me to adapt to at first because in Souls games, I usually don't use a shield at all or block in general. I just like to dodge using the B button. Another difference versus Dark Souls game is that when you press B once here, you just dash, and then when you press B again, you do a full roll. So that was also something I had to get used to. There's also a parry that's really good in this game, and you should figure out right away for how to optimally use it. I'd say the windows are pretty big, so it's not too hard to parry enemies here. Once you have the combat fundamentals nailed down here, it's a lot of fun to experiment with the different shells and weapons. There's about 4 different shells, and then there's probably 4 or 5 different weapons also. They've added content to the game after the launch, so when I originally played, I think there was around 4 of them. I remember my first playthrough, I used the Solomon Shell and the War Pick as a weapon. Now I really like this weapon. In this game, you can upgrade your weapons to have special abilities, and these special abilities can be super powerful. You build up a meter that allows you to use the powers on them. I remember I structured my whole build around using that War Pick ability as frequently as possible, so I basically picked the abilities that let me build that meter up as soon as I could. And then for the War Pick, its special ability, you would hit a nail out of the air, doing massive damage to enemies from a distance. And for bosses, I would just exploit this, build the meter up as frequently as I could, and just do massive damage to them through that attack. Now, like with any Souls game, let's talk about currency and death. So for currency here, we have Tar and Glimpses. Tar is basically the Souls equivalent for this game, and Glimpses are a more specialized form of currency that you can get from items or beating bosses. You use this currency to upgrade your shell. You have different abilities here that you can unlock, so it's not exactly like Dark Souls where you have stats where you directly upgrade. Here the shells have different stats overall, so you might want to pick and choose based off what you like. For instance, if you want to go full tank, there's a shell for that, whereas if you want to be more agile, you'll probably want to pick a different shell. Now there's a pretty interesting mechanic related to death here. The first time you die, you're going to be ejected out of your shell, and then you want to try to make it back into your shell as fast as you can, because you're really weak outside of it. Now if you make it back in, you're good to go, and you can keep fighting, but if you die again or outside of your shell, you're going to lose your tar, and you have to run back and get your tar, just like in Dark Souls. The animations in Mortal Shell have a lot of heft behind them, and you really feel the weight of your movement here. This can make combat a little bit slow, but I still find combat to be very satisfying, trying to optimize your usage of your harden abilities, your dodges, and when to use your weapon abilities. Now as far as environments are concerned, we have swamps just like right out of Dark Souls. There's also some pretty unique environments like an obsidian fortress. Now the whole map has shortcuts that connect the whole thing together, because you won't be unlocking fast travel for a while here, but it's pretty quick to get around the whole map. One really cool feature they added to the game after launch was the roguelike content mode. I haven't played this mode at all, but I've heard it's pretty cool. Now, as far as performance on the Steam Deck is concerned, we get really good performance here. At first, I just launched the game with medium settings and 100% resolution scaling at 720p. Using these settings, we were dipping below 60 FPS pretty frequently. I'd say if you log it down to 40 FPS, you should be good here, but the boggy area was definitely a little bit more demanding. To try to hit the 60 FPS mark, at first I dropped the settings down to low, but that didn't really get me there. So instead, I switched back to medium settings and set the resolution down to 70% resolution scaling, and that actually worked really well. I was at 60 FPS for the most part. There were dips below, so maybe dropping a few settings to low with that 70% resolution scaling would really get you that consistent 60 FPS. I just really think Souls games are best played at a high frame rate. I do have quite a bit to say about Mortal Shell since I beat it a while back and really enjoyed it. This one has quite a few unique mechanics and really gives you that Dark Souls feeling, so definitely check it out. Thymesia is the newest game I'm looking at today. It just dropped shortly before this video came out, actually. Now, if Mortal Shell is heavy but satisfying, Thymesia is on the other end where it's fast and fluid. A lot of Souls-like games draw their influence directly from Dark Souls, but Thymesia is definitely drawing its influence more from Bloodborne. Set in a plague-ridden world, you play as Corvus going through your memories in a way that really reminds me of Demon Souls, where you have the Nexus and can pick what levels to go through. Unlike a lot of Souls-like games, your weapon pool is pretty restricted here to just your saber and your character's abilities. A really unique mechanic comes into play here though, because each enemy has a weapon type associated with them. When you kill enemies with a charged up claw attack, you'll actually steal that weapon off of them and can use it on your own. If you've just stolen the weapon from an enemy, you can use it one time and then it's lost, but if you have it equipped to you, you can use your energy meter to repeatedly attack with it. By killing more enemies associated with this weapon types too, there's a chance they'll drop these shards, and with more of these shards you can upgrade your weapon types more. Another unique thing about Thymesia is when you fight enemies, they actually have 2 health bars. The initial one will drop when you hit them with your saber, but then the second one's green, and you want to take that out using your claw attacks. If you don't take out the secondary health bar fast enough, enemies will regenerate the health they've lost, but if you get them down all the way, you have the opportunity to execute the enemy in a really nice animation, or you can charge up your claw and steal the Reeve weapon from them. Death happens very straightforward here. If you die, you're sent back to essentially what is your last bonfire, and then you have to go out into the world and find where you died last, touch the point, and you'll get your money back. The money here can be spent on upgrading your character. There's only 3 stats to upgrade here: Strength, Vigor, and Plague. A lot of these affect your offensive stats, and then Vigor affects how much health you have overall. For each point you spend on the attributes, you'll get 1 talent point. Talent points can be spent on different aspects of your character. For instance, if you want to be really good with your saber, you can invest all the talent points there and get really good with a sword. But there's also a variety of other areas, such as deflecting or dodging or your feathers, which stop special enemy attacks, to invest these points in also. So this gives you a good amount of build variety, and you can reinvest these points whenever you want and however you want. Being a Plague Doctor, you're also given access to upgrading your potions in different ways, so there's a lot of customization you can do for your character overall here. Just like Sekiro, you're going to want to get really good at parrying in this game. Randomly wailing on bosses isn't necessarily the best a lot of the time, and parrying their attacks can do significantly more damage. I find the parry window to be a lot smaller here than in Mortal Shell, so it will take some getting used to. On top of that, the bosses here are no slouch either. Even some of the earliest bosses in the game have multiple health bars, so just be aware of that going in. Now, performance-wise, this one is once again an Unreal Engine 4 title, and it does have some real-time shader compilation issues. But other than that, the performance here was really solid overall. I set things down to about medium or low, with most things set to medium, and I dropped the resolution down to about 75%. I actually found myself preferring the look of Unreal Engine 4's built-in upscaler versus the AMD FSR 1.0 implementation that is built into this game here. When I used that one, the game looked pretty rugged, in my opinion, like a lot of jagged edges, where the Unreal Engine 4 one looked a little bit softer and nicer to my eye. Now for this one, I was actually targeting 40 to 45 FPS with a lock there instead, because hitting 60 FPS in this game is really hard on the Steam Deck unless you want to destroy your graphics. Locked to 40 or 45 FPS, I had a very flat frame time graph, except for the occasional shader compilation issue, which would spike the frame time graph here and there. If you love Bloodborne and want something a bit faster than your regular Souls-like, consider checking out Thymesia. Now, I wanted to make sure to include a 2D game here, because there's a ton of 2D Souls games, and here we have Blasphemous. Souls-like mechanics fit great with Metroidvanias, and Blasphemous is a great example of that. There's other games I thought about putting on here, like Ender Lilies, which I've covered previously, or Bloodstained, which is more of an Egavanian type of game. Now, I haven't played a ton of Blasphemous, but 2 of my good friends have completed the game and recommended it to me. I want to say thanks to my friend Chris for writing me a few notes for this video, so thanks for that, Chris. Immediately upon firing this game up, one of the things that gripped me the most was the stunning pixel art style the game has in cutscenes and in-game. This game does a really good job of taking that fanatical religious vibe and pushing it to the extreme with a crazy looking main character and some really interesting looking enemies here. Right away in this one, you'll see items and secrets tucked away that you can't access immediately, as you need new mechanics to come back and explore the areas thoroughly later on. That's definitely the Metroidvania side of things here, so if Metroidvanias are up your alley, definitely check this one out. When it comes to Souls-like mechanics, here you accumulate tears instead of souls, which are your currency. You can use this to upgrade your weapon instead of upgrading your individual stats. On top of this, just like Souls games, there's essentially bonfires where you can set checkpoints at, and then when you die, you'll respawn here. When you die in this game, you will be sent back to the last point you touched. Now here you don't lose all your souls or tears right away, but you actually are debuffed, so you get less tears and you actually build less fervor. Now you can clear this debuff by going back to where you died and picking up the points there, or talking to certain NPCs that'll clear this debuff off of your character. Both the lore and story of this game are quite interesting, and just like the Souls games, if you examine items, you can see descriptions of them, which help flesh out the lore. In a game like this with beautiful art, a very interesting world, and tons of secrets, you're going to spend a lot of time just exploring around here, and post-launch support for this game has been fantastic. At this point, the game has received its final DLC, but Blasphemous 2 is on the horizon. Now, Chris left me a couple notes here about things he thought could be improved in the game. One thing is that he felt combat left a little bit to be desired, and the other thing is that platforming can be kind of frustrating in certain sections, because a lot of the hazards here are one-hit kill, so if you fall off an edge or an enemy knocks you off the edge, you're just instantly dead and have to go back to a checkpoint. Now, as far as performance on the Steam Deck goes, this game runs great. You'll get 60 FPS all the time with great battery life. It's a very easy to run game. And it actually has a native Linux version that runs by default on the Steam Deck unless you force a compatibility layer. Chris noticed when he booted this game up on his Steam Deck, the saves from the PC version weren't there on the Linux version, and he did have to set the compatibility layer to get that Windows version to run on the Steam Deck, and then his saves popped up. So just keep that in mind if you're trying to play between PC and your Steam Deck. Now that I've played Blasphemous for a little while, I'm itching to go back in and play even more, and knowing that it has a crossover with one of my favorite games, Bloodstained, really draws me back into the game. Pretty soon I have to hop on a couple of long flights, and Blasphemous is definitely going to be one of those games that's on my Steam Deck, taking up my time. Here we have Code Vein. Now when this one came out, a lot of people referred to it as anime Dark Souls, because as you can see from the footage here, it definitely has an anime art style. Just like most of the other games we're looking at today, this one is made in Unreal Engine 4. Now one thing to note off the bat here is that in most Souls games, when you attack, it's right bumper or right trigger for light and heavy attack, but this one, you have X as your light attack and Y as your heavy attack. You can hold Y to charge up your heavy attack, and then let it go to do a little combo too here, and it's going to depend what class you play. In Code Vein, you can switch between different classes on the fly, and these are called blood codes. At first, you only have access to 3 of them, a pretty standard fighter, a mage, and then a ranger type of class. And these are pretty nice because they offer you different playstyles, and they have different skills. The skills are called gifts, and they have passive and active skills that you can use in combat. Here, this gift system and blood code system is definitely different than Dark Souls. In Dark Souls, you pick like a base class, and then you can customize from there. And this one, your classes are definitely going to help determine your stats and what skills you have access to in general. And these gifts are quite a bit different than anything in Dark Souls. In Dark Souls, you have weapon arts or magic that you can equip to your character. The weapon arts are just tied to certain weapons, but here you have different active abilities or passive ones that you can equip to your right trigger. So if you hold right trigger, then press any of the face buttons or press on the D-pad in certain directions, you can activate what skill you want, and you can assign those just in the menu. Some of these skills are pretty simple things, like buff your attack for a certain period of time, but there's also pretty cool ones like whip up a pool of blood around you that'll damage all the enemies around you, or launch bolts of blood as well. Now these skills can't be spammed. You do have to attack enemies and drain them of their blood in order to get more uses for them, so it's a good balance there. Another thing to note about this game is that there's a lot more cutscenes and story elements than there is in a lot of Souls-like games, and especially Dark Souls or Elden Ring itself. Typically, the story in FromSoft games are told from the environment or weapon descriptions or talking to NPCs in the world, not just through cutscenes, and even the cutscenes in the games are pretty short and don't take up a massive amount of time. In comparison here, there can be long cutscenes that have a lot of exposition and dialogue that's presented to you. Now, another major system for Code Vein that makes it unique is the partner system. In Dark Souls, you can call in friends to help you out in the world, but in this game, you can call in NPCs and a bunch of different ones too, to just fully explore the game with you, or you can call in an online friend to help you out. I've heard some of these NPCs can be super powerful and make the game pretty trivial, and definitely depending on what code you're using as your class, this can help a lot. If you're playing something like a caster where you need some distance between you and the enemy, maybe taking like a tanky frontline partner will help you out a lot in combat there. I've owned Code Vein on the PC for a while, but I haven't beaten the game. I honestly haven't played a tremendous amount. I've tried to go through this one with friends before, but we dropped the game pretty early on. We just had other stuff going on that we had to take care of. I do want to come back and play this game, and it's a pretty good character creator, so you can really make whatever kind of character you want. Now, regarding performance on the Steam Deck. At first, I had things turned up to the highest graphical settings possible, and things were going well there, hitting 60 FPS, but I was in a small area that wasn't representative of the average gameplay. Just a little bit later on, though, you'll get to an area that's a lot more representative of the average performance of the game. Another thing to note here is that the cutscenes can be pretty intensive. There's more post-processing going on there with depth of field, so I turned everything down to medium, and the frame rates were still pretty good. I was in the upper 50s for most of the time, Now, one thing to note, like I mentioned earlier, this game is made on Unreal Engine 4, and UE4 can have stuttering problems. A lot of the time, this is due to shaders being cached in real time, but in this game, they represent themselves a lot when you just load into an area for the first time. I think textures are loading in, and I honestly think it's worse here than it is on a Windows machine. This game is rated as playable on the Steam Deck, but I don't think shaders are pre-cached here, so sometimes when effects would appear on the screen for the first time, I would also get that shader compilation stutter. When I locked the frame rate down to 40 FPS, I definitely got a more consistent frame rate overall, but there were still frame time spikes. They mostly happen when you load into an area for the first time, but can still pop up throughout your playthrough. Despite that, I'd say this game is definitely still playable on the Steam Deck. It's probably not my favorite game out of the bunch here, but I'd still recommend you check it out. The final game we'll be checking out today is Remnant from the Ashes. This game has been out for a while and has had a lot of post-launch support. People really enjoy this game on Steam. Gameplay-wise, this one's quite a bit different from the titles I've talked about previously here today, and a lot of Souls-like in general, because this is a third-person shooter. You can't take cover here like something in Gears of War, and you can still dodge around like in Dark Souls, but a lot of your time in combat will be spent using your guns to shoot enemies down. At the start of the game, you have the option to go through a tutorial. I'd recommend you do so. It's a little bit slow, but it teaches you some important mechanics. Once you're through the tutorial, you can pick your class. There's 3 to pick from here, one for short range, one for mid range, and one for long range. These classes have different guns and abilities, so pick wisely because once you make your choice, you can't switch unless you roll a new character. I really like the style and vibe of the world here. It really gives me Fallout 3 vibes as a post-apocalyptic setting, but also has some Lovecraftian horror injected in there. Compared to a lot of Souls-like games, this one's not too punishing when you die, as you'll just be sent back to your checkpoint, but you won't lose any of your currency. As you play through the game, you'll acquire scrap and different other forms of currency that you can use to upgrade your weapons and buy goods for your character at the hub world. When you level up, you'll have the ability to customize your character a bit more by spending points on traits, which will level up certain attributes. You won't be spending currency directly on these like a lot of Souls-like games, but you will be using currency to do things like upgrade your weapons or armor. Guns here also have weapon mod slots, which allows you to customize how they function and gives them unique abilities. Remnant's a great game to play with your friends, as you can do co-op through the entire game with 2 of your other friends online. The co-op in this game was very highly praised, and that's when my friend and I decided to dive into it in the first place. It was free on the Epic Store, so we decided to give it a shot. Now, as far as performance on the Steam Deck is concerned, I was getting pretty good frame rate here using all medium settings, but it was dipping to around 40 FPS at some points. The GPU load was pretty heavy there. If you drop things down to pretty much all low and then set texture to high, you'll hit 60 FPS a lot more consistently in the most demanding areas of the game. That's usually the bigger open areas. Unfortunately, this game does not have a built-in resolution scale option where you can drop it down to like 75%. You can change the resolution and then use FSR to upscale it back up, but honestly, I played around with this a bit and I found myself just preferring dropping things to low with textures on high. It gave me a better visual experience overall and similar frame rate to what you would get if you drop the resolution here. The footage you're seeing now is locked to 30 FPS, but I did take these settings on the go and lock them down to about 40 FPS, and it was extremely consistent on the frame time graph. The only time I saw a spike at all was when we were loading to a new area for the first time, which is not unusual for video games. This game is also built on Unreal Engine 4, but this one's verified on the Steam Deck, and I'm pretty sure the shaders are pre-cached here, which really helps avoid stuttering problems. Overall, I would lock things down to about 40 FPS and then mess with the settings a bit to see what you can eke out graphics-wise without upsetting the frame time graph too much. That's all the games I'm going to be listing off here today, guys. Let me know in the comments down below if you've played any of the games before and how you felt about them. Later this year, I'm really looking forward to Soulstice, Lies of P, and Steelrising. Soulstice in particular because I'm a massive Berserk fan, and that game looks really heavily inspired by Berserk. So I'll cover those on Steam Deck and the performance they get as soon as they launch. Other than that, leave a thumbs up on the video if you liked it, and consider subscribing to the Steel Lodge. I've got a bunch of Steam Deck and gaming content on here. So that's about it. Have a good one, guys.